Welcome to Warblog. This is a very quick book review. And when I say a review, all I'm really going to do is just tell you that I bought two books. I quite often go to the library where they have these sort of second-hand books, and I haven't even read them really, quite obviously, but I've had a look through the first one. The first one is Azerbaijan Diary, a road reporter's adventures in the oil-rich, war-torn post-Soviet Republic by Thomas Goltz. I've read a little bit of that. And the other one is Hearts Grown Brutal, Sagas of Sarajevo by Roger Cohen. Neither of these books struck me as being particularly exciting because I only really like books that sort of are sort of chronologies of the battles and the periods of the chronology of these wars, and both of these appear to be sort of first person perspectives of certain things that happened. Now I've got but they're both of fairly interesting periods. Sarajevo and Azerbaijan, which is a bit of a break from what's usually on the shelves, just endless Vietnam books or Korean War books or things like that. So when I see these sorts of books, I tend to sort of pick them out, but at the same time I have grown fairly sort of fatigued to the fact that there's probably not a lot of battle content, but there is sort of a small benefit to these sorts of books if you've got the time to read them, which I sort of do and I don't. I mean, I don't really, to be quite honest, and I probably won't. I could go back and I've got around 20 books in the other room there, and they're all of the same sort of specific sort of oddity, and I've not really read them, but I intend to read them. But when you do, you pick things up. But this one on the Sarajevo, Hearts Grown Brutal, I've not looked at it, so this is me sort of just really fiddling with it. One thing I do like, one thing I note about books like this, it doesn't look like it's ever been read. I'm looking down there, and there's absolutely no wear on it. I read books like a monster. I deliberately throw them around. If I take them to the beach, I leave them open and get sand in the pages, and if I can put a coffee cup in them, I will. I'll rest a sandwich, because I think books should be read. I've no idea who Roger Cohen is, but I've written a few books myself, and the last thing you really want is to write a lot of books. And a lot of these books are sort of what I call, I don't know anything about Roger Cohen, but a lot of books just appear to be what I call vanity press. People write books and they print them, and that's how they get into existence. No one really particularly buys them. I found it quite hard to get good books on modern warfare, and I've been doing this for a while now. Even this book on the Greek Civil War that I just bought, which is supposed to be the best on the field, which was written in like 65, isn't particularly that great. There's no maps. Here there's no maps. A list of maps, section 15. Yeah, I mean, he's got a few maps. No battle maps. I mean, the height of Serb conquest, 91 to 95. He's got the Varnsovin peace plan map, a contact group peace map, the Dayton Agreement of 95 peace map, the formation of Serbia between 1830 and 1918 map, the predominant ethnic groups of Yugoslavia as a war in Bosnia begins map. These are not maps. This is not a map of whatever. His sections, obviously, acknowledgements, preface, list of maps, note on pronunciation, cast of characters, chronology. This is sort of, he's got he divided it into to 3 books. I'll just go through the titles just to give you a sort of an idea. Well, the first one's probably not worth it. Well, maybe it is. So the chapters: My Father's War, The Pessimist, The Trains of History, Cold War, The Capital of the Ottomans, Death in Vienna, God and a Bottle of Gin, The Cypress Tree, The Tomb. That's the first book. The second book has 3 parts. Part 1, Division, A Death in the Family, March on the Drina, History as Acts, White City. Part 2, Camps, Disappearances, Celestial People, Useless Violence, Broken Bridges. Part 3, Bleeding Hearts, The Death Observed, Moja Bosna, The Tangled Roads of God, Highway to Tomorrow, The Bell. That's the end of that book. Book 3 is in basically 1 part. Our Croatian Friends, Fragments of a Life, More Guns Than Pigs, The Dark Side of the Mirror, The Flash of a Knife, Postcard to Amra, Sarajevo Abandoned, The Unfortunate Incident, Kosovo Polje, The Beckoning Sea. Now, to me, that just sounds like a load of crap. I mean, they're just, it's not a list of, the push for what's the job or anything like that. I mean, I wish I could. The thing is, I don't even know what Sarajevo is. The Balkans. This is the thing. But the thing is, I'm not doing this video to sort of cut this down. What I'm trying to say, and it'll become more apparent in the Azerbaijan diary, is when you pick them up, you get a sense of what's happening. For example, there was a section here when the shells of Karadovic's forces started to fall on Sarajevo the day after the demonstration. Voljina was terrified. She'd never taken Karadzik seriously. A Montenegrin poet-physicist who had come to Bosnia to tell the Bosnian Serbs they were endangered by the Muslims. Her husband, Milos Jelic, also a Montenegrin, had warned her for several years that war might come, but Voljina waved away his fears. Now, this is obviously a first-person account on some sort of personal perspective, but you get this sense that, well, there are shells falling on Sarajevo the day after the demonstration, which presumably they've been talking about. Voljina left the city on the 12th of April 1992, the same day as Vesna and Jesna Karisic, presumably 2 other people. She went to Belgrade and then to Tulsa, blah, blah, blah. It's all very sort of personal based, what these people are doing. But in the midst of that, you get dates. For example, the 12th of April 1992. On May 14th, 1992, there were announcements on television assuring people that war did not threaten Tulsa. The next day, Kosa went, as usual, to the school where she taught mathematics. At 2:45 p.m., the school bells sounded. The teachers were told to inform their students that the school year, which would normally have continued until 10th of June, was over. The bus service had mysteriously stopped, so Kosa walked home. At about 6 p.m. she started to hear waves of machine gun fire and explosions. So it's sort of stuff that, to me, sounds really bad. I can't sit there and read through all of that, but I can sort of, if it's just background reading. For example, I read the My Brother, My Killer, or My Brother, My Enemy, which is about the Ethiopia-Eritrea war. And it was written in a similar style, although I would say less what I call wet, with this narrative that has a continual backdrop of dates and places and things that are happening. And you can read things through that. Now, back onto this Azerbaijan, I did actually read a few bits from it. It's got a picture of him in the back. Is that him? His moustache. Now, let me just read the index, maybe. This looks like a better one, but I don't know. So the contents, obviously a preface, acknowledgements and special thanks, prologue. Getting there fair and square, a distant coup. Friday evening on Freedom Square. Karabakh, the Black Garden. Home Sweet Baku, a reborn republic. Zojali, slithering in the swamp. The militias and maimed, of militias and maimed the mule. Okay, a diversion through the Islamic Republic of Iran. Riding the roller coaster. Coup redux. From ballots to bullets, an army stumbles forward. Ataturk of war and oil. Corruption in the ranks. Rumblings of dissent. I'm not even going to bother reading the rest. There's about 5 more, 10 more. They're very esoteric titles. There's nothing in there that sort of suggests this is a chronology on something you can get your teeth into. But I did start to read it, and I've read 3 or 4 pages there. And basically, the chapter I read was A Distant Coup, and it starts off, on the evening of August 19th, I was jamming with a band in a Tashkent nightclub located in a sauna, cranking out my rendition of Framed. I'm not going to read it out because he's talking about it. Basically, what he's talking about here is a birthday party of Armenians cavorted around the dance floor while James Rupert of the Washington Post did a jig with my wife. I'm not sure I'd be happy about that. We were having, maybe if he's okay with that, maybe I should get in touch with him. We were having such a good time that we stayed out late and didn't wake until noon the next day. It was then we learned that we'd been dancing while Rome burned. Actually, it was Moscow, and it wasn't on fire. It was the coup of August 19th that spelled the end of the Soviet Empire. For anyone who missed the event, it went something like this. While Mikhail Gorbachev was down in the Crimea on a much-needed vacation, a group of hardline old communists who did not like glasnost and perestroika decided to turn back the clock and bring back the bad old days. And so they announced that Gorbachev had been incapacitated by a grave illness of an undefined sort and handed over the reins of government to an emergency council led by Vice President Gennady Yanev. That was the official version. The unofficial version was much more complex. It started with the notion that Yanev was more of a hard drinker than a hard liner. The other putschists were similarly described as being a bunch of mean-spirited commie buffoons. Thank God, all that one man stood in their way, Boris Yeltsin, defiantly standing atop a tank parked in front of the Russian Parliament building, the White House. He let it be known that, as the democratically elected leader of Russia, he had no intention of bowing to a bunch of putschmeisters. A standoff ensued. The army, or important elements of it, went over to Yeltsin, and the censored press rebelled, and after 3 days the putsch collapsed. A humbled Mikhail Gorbachev returned to a different Moscow and the terror of freedom. Blah, 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 it goes on. And basically, to be quite honest, I don't really know what happened, but this is what they're really talking about there is essentially the, and I think it's the perestroika thing, I don't know, but basically the splitting up of the Soviet Union. So it goes on. So the Cold War was over and the West had won, but no sooner had the celebration begun than other thoughts began to sink in. Whatever else the centre had stood for, it meant continuity and control. You could count on the Kremlin. And as the 15 diverse republics and then autonomous republics and autonomous regions that made up the USSR started to break away, some of the same people celebrating the demise of the Soviet Union in autumn of 1991 were becoming almost nostalgic for it less than a year later. there's some interesting bits there. I just want to maybe get to that. It's talking about sort of recognition and how different Soviet satellites sort of responded, or different parts of the Soviet Union responded to it. Basically, he started talking about how no one really noticed in Uzbekistan. It says here some leaders like Kazakhstan President Nursultan Nazarbayev came out early in their support for Yeltsin and Gorbachev, and thus gained stature for being brave and democratic, while the former adjective was certainly true, one had to wonder about the latter. Others, like Uzbekistan President Islam Karimov, came out a little too late in their public support, and thus gained the onus of being cowardly and undemocratic. While the latter was true, one had to wonder about the former. The bit I want to get to, I don't have to read it all out. Actually, quite a few of the people in the old USSR had similar thoughts about Gorbachev and were not so sad to see him ousted. Okay. This, of course, is a big lie that stunk to high heaven. Okay, they're talking about the people claiming that they were well into it. Yes, it was a lie that stank to high heaven, but in late summer 1991, everything about the USSR also stank. It was like a decomposing corpse, or maybe a terminally sick patient afflicted with leprosy. The first limbs to fall off were the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia, which declared themselves to be free and independent states, to be the free and independent states they had been before World War II. The United States had never formally accepted their being part of the USSR, was hesitant to bestow recognition, fearing a reaction in Moscow. Next came Ukraine, Belarus and Moldova. They too announced themselves to be free and independent states. Sans all that SSR jazz. And when Russia declared itself to be Russia and independent of the USSR, well, the confusion became complete. It was almost like declaring oneself independent of oneself. As for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, some wags were already kicking around new names for it, like the USS Aunt. I haven't got the bit I want to find. The biggest of the lot, Kazakhstan, didn't get round to making the almost pro forma declaration of sovereignty until the USSR was formally dissolved, and the Kazakh SSR had to be something because its previous defining features no longer existed. Leaders in Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan reacted in much the same way. But my perspective was from Uzbekistan. This is the author. When the dam broke, I almost expected to see Amir Timur Tamerlane riding out of the past at the head of a legion of Basmaki freedom fighters to wrest Central Asia away from the Russian yoke. But nothing of the sort happened. The Uzbeks were silent on August the 19th, and they were silent on August the 20th, and they were silent on August the 21st. They were silent when it looked as if the reactionaries had won, and they were silent when Yeltsin went out and did his high noon act atop a tank in front of the White House, and they were silent when the coup collapsed and failed, and Gorbachev came back. Then, about 10 days after the coup, and still with no public discussion whatsoever, and without a single solitary demonstration for or against it, Uzbekistan President and Communist Party boss Islam Karimov announced that his country was independent and sovereign, whatever that meant. Some suggested that Karimov had selected September 1st because it was the first day of school and he wanted to peg Independence Day with that date, with a date that would be difficult to forget. Maybe, but the response from the Uzbek public was silent. There wasn't a word or a whisper. Where were the crowds? Where were the cries of freedom in the streets? Where were the incisive articles in the unshackled press? That was what I wanted to get to, really. And I don't think there's anything particularly magical, special about what I've just read out. But I read that, and I was sitting there thinking, well, this is quite interesting because it's given me an insight into, the backgrounds of things, and I'm sort of thinking, well, hang on, I don't really know why the USSR split up. I mean, it seemed to me that it must have been something to do with this perestroika thing, so I'll have to look that up and just get my head around it so that I know, because, doing what I do, you might have thought that I'd be quite clever and specialist and know these things, and, I mean, I could look these things up on Wikipedia, but I like having these books and things that you can read in the park and just sort of, you can just sit there and you digest things and you suddenly learn and absorb things in a different way. But it does sort of put things into a sort of quite an interesting perspective, really. And I think, generally speaking, one of the reasons I'm doing this video is basically because I got these books. But as I was cycling back with these books, after having sort of bought them from the library and kept brazing, I only had a 15-minute read because it's getting dark. Well, the sun was going down, and basically, I thought, I feel as I'm getting to another level on this because there's so many scenarios now. If you just even look through the list of wars, there's just tons. And you can start to sort of piece things together with these books. I mean, Azerbaijan. There we go. You sort of think, well, what have we got? Well, this is obviously a recent thing, and this is 2016. So this Azerbaijan War Diary, I think, considering it's published in 1998, it's probably something I've not really done yet. So, and I'm not sure really what happens, but I'm pretty sure there's got to be some sort of combat in here. I hope so, because that's the only reason I bought it. It's got a military helicopter on the front page. It says war torn. So, but the thing is, you start to sort of put these things into perspective, and what I'm finding myself doing is, and I'm quite happy with this, is developing a vocabulary and a broader understanding of what I call modern military history, in the sense that things are not obscure and hidden in my ignorance, that I can suddenly start placing things and start putting smaller pieces of a jigsaw together to create much larger pictures. And I think buying these books is just sort of, it does give you a sort of, the background that starts to put flesh onto bones. And there's still such a long way to go. But when I was reading through it, I think what, this book they're both actually pretty big books. I mean, this book is, it's basically 487 pages, and that's all the way to the epilogue. But I mean, it's about an inch and a half thick, and so is the other one. The other one's paperback, this one's hardback. So they're both fairly sort of solid books. And I was thinking, well, this Thomas Galton probably knows what he's talking about. And there was someone actually, they were actually a consultant, or they're basically a university. And I can't remember what they did, but they were talking absolute crap. And it was all sort of about peace studies, and he's got this sort of doctorate, and he was a lecturer at some sort of college, or not a big university, but a sort of an institution of further education, in Milwaukee, I think, or if is it in America, I don't know, sort of like in Michigan or something. And you get the feeling that there are people out there that their speciality in life, like some people, their speciality is sitting outside their house in the street, staring at everyone that passes, and shouting loudly and playing their car stereo at full volume. And you sort of thought, well, fair enough, and that's their speciality. But you can have a speciality that is sort of, almost homegrown, although not acknowledged, where you become incredibly familiar and knowledgeable on things basically like this, modern war. It's not a non-subject, it's not a non-issue. It's something that you could then start to sort of, leverage. I mean, I am going to be writing the Journal of Modern Military History. That's in the pipeline. I've got the tools set up to start producing it. I haven't done anything yet because it's a little harder, but that is, it's not really got anything to do with this, but and it's all part and parcel of what I've been planning for a long time. But you can see here there's these quizzes, and these quizzes are going to take, these are easy to do. The journal thing is a lot harder, but I'm tending to sort of maybe commit a weekend to really getting to grips with it. It'll probably take me 2 or 3 weekends, over a certain amount of time, but I'm looking forward to getting one done. It probably won't be done particularly well, but the point I'm trying to make is, this is almost from a personal perspective, but I can start to sort of almost envision myself partly becoming an expert. And I say that, there's no way I'm an expert. But the thing is, what I'm saying is, if you keep looking at the same thing again and again and again, you start to realise that you know where all these places are. Things start to become more familiar with you. Who is the leader of ISIS? Now, the thing is, I sort of don't know, but I do know now because I looked it up. But you start some of these things. This was a new one. What is the name of the flag used by the Islamic State? I learned this today. I've heard the name al-Baghdadi a few times, but that is history. That is a part of history. But it's actually the Black Standard. I always thought it was obviously I know it's not the Jolly Roger, but I always thought their flag looked a bit like the pirate flag. But it's actually the Black Standard, and you can start to sort of put all these bits together into history. And these books really, once you've got the foundations, which Warblog pretty much gives you, once you start reading these books, I think, I've chosen the more esoteric ones, and I'm hoping the Azerbaijan diary will give me something to work for, to work from. But essentially, if you follow Warblog, I was thinking, well, what would you get if you followed Warblog? And and I think there's this skill and a skill set that you could almost level with an academic discipline in a subject such as modern political studies or modern political science, or but what I'm saying is, this person Thomas Galton, he was a reporter, so he's written his book on the back of the fact that he was a reporter, and so he spent a lot of time out there and became familiar. But the point I'm sort of trying to get to is it's quite broad and esoteric in its own sense, but that person must know a lot about Azerbaijan, and he suddenly becomes an asset And you could almost see him becoming an asset to, nation states in a similar way that the other person I was talking about, who's in the Michigan University or something, I don't know, some North American bit, or whatever you call third-rate universities, doing some crappy third-rate sort of studies. But he probably stands there because he does talks and he writes books. He's probably no small cog in the system, and he's being paid a salary. And that was what struck me. He's probably being paid a salary to sort of look into and talk a load of crap about, foreign affairs and things of that nature. I wish I could find out the reference, because there were 3 or 4 things he specialised in, and all good for him, and it's all quite interesting. But his focus, I think, they always seem to study on, they never take the bull by the horns. It's always sort of, in the furtherance of peace studies and things like that. But the thing is, these things all add up to a sort of a compendium of understanding, comprehension, and knowledge on certain things that, to some extent, give a person some sort of caliber and credence with regards to sort of who they are, and in a formative way. I mean, for example, people will go to university and they will study politics, or they will go to university and they'll study political history, or they'll take a course or a semester or something on political history or military history or modern military history. And I think once you get to that stage, the people are being paid to consider and to understand history at this level. And it's always been my intention to really sort of, to some extent, really sort of, I don't know, mesh with that as a discipline. For example, I quite often look at, what other game designers are doing, and particularly honest, I'm just not impressed with anything. There's nothing out there that I ever want to play. Maybe it's partly because I'm so busy doing Warblog, and it's also because I'm just old. But one of these games recently released, and there is nothing unusual about this, but a scenario generator. And I was just thinking, well, why would you want a scenario generator, to create a sort of a randomly balanced game? Well, fair enough, I can understand that. I used to play Firefly, which is 6mm micro tanks, and you create random, you'd have points, and you could create random scenarios, and we used to create random maps, and we had books with scenarios, and to be quite honest, some of them might have been historic, but they never really struck. I never followed them as historical scenarios, just scenarios. And so, but the thing is, when you're just maybe very young as well, maybe it's just the kinetics and the gaming of it, and you just want 2 balanced sides. I can remember watching people playing Ancients, and in Ancients you just get a certain number of points to spend on chariots or horses or infantry or spearmen or phalanx, and then you plonk them up wherever you want, and then you basically bash each other, and someone wins and loses. And so, yeah, that's fair enough. I remember when I played a lot of American Civil War, some of the people that I was with took a lot of effort of buying books on the American Civil War and bringing them to the games and reading them aloud. And I can remember not being particularly interested, but at the same time noting that there was more to it, and these books were quite nice. And I sort of bought a few books myself, and I read the history and the background, but I wasn't really I don't know, it wasn't really compelling. It was just sort of, well, I spent so much time, playing these games that I sort of read the books. But now, I really just, it's all about the history for me now. So much so that, playing them is less relevant. But I think the point I'm trying to get to is you start to sort of develop this sort of mental caliber and understanding of the sort of these subject matters, that there is actually, it does have a sort of a value. And I think the unfortunate thing about it, and this is something I'm sort of aware of, you've got to say, well, where does that currency take you if it has a value? And you can't really just start talking to someone and they say, what have you been doing? I say, well, I was just looking at the Battle of Florina. You don't expect them to say, oh, Greece, 12th, 15th February 49. That was an interesting time, You say, oh, right, you know about it. Oh, yeah, I know all about that, because they don't. No one's going to know about this stuff. So where this takes you, it takes you nowhere like that. But if you can suddenly start to sort of find someone that will say, is interested in that, you'll probably find an interesting person. I mean, not in a sort of fact that everyone else is non-interesting, but it's a currency that will get you in. So, for example, I mean, I can remember I was sitting on a flight recently, and there were these two people sat a few rows in front of me. I didn't speak to them or anything, but they just were a bit strange. But one of them, well, obviously reporters of some sort, but one of them had a camera, and it was like a massive camera, but it wasn't sort of, oh gosh, please don't scratch my camera, like I'm going to photograph some sort of flowers with it or something. I mean, it looked scruffy. It looked like, it was like a sort of a mobile computer that a builder would take on site. It was rugged and robust and clearly well worn. And this guy looked slightly tanned, and there was something about him, that really made me sort of think, who is this? Is this a reporter? Is he going out to, well, it was a flight through to Amsterdam, but was he going through to Syria? I mean, he could have been going through to Poland to do videos on swans. I don't know, or the elections. There's nothing, but my mind wandered. And I just saw these people as reporters. Now, the cameraman was quite young, and he just looked like he had a really good job. And it just struck me as being, a really interesting career and a really interesting thing to be involved with. And the thing is, he was just the cameraman. The guy he was with, who I presumed was the anchor, was a really sort of big looking person. I mean, I'm not saying big physically. They were both actually quite big physically, and that struck me as well, because I sort of thought, well, these people probably have to take care of themselves. I mean, they're not just in a foreign land, but they've got some expensive kit, and they're probably putting themselves into strange places, and they're probably having a lot of people just thinking they can come up and start talking to them, and they probably got to handle themselves. But they looked fairly intelligent and probably not too keen on sort of getting involved in punch-ups. But the anchor, or the person that he'd probably be filming, he struck me as someone that I knew from some kind of, film cast. He struck me like a sort of a CNN reporter or a Reuters reporter. I mean, I don't know any, but I know Brian Cantley, who was kidnapped by ISIS, and seen a lot of his reports, and it sort of made me wonder, that sort of that sort of vocation job. I think I don't want to say in its own right has a romantic sort of cadence to it, but it's sort of, I think these are really good things. I mean, I'm too old for all that now, but I was sort of thinking, well, gosh, I could have done that. That would have been fun. That would have been a good career. Going off and reporting. I used to read the newspapers quite a lot, and I was particularly taken by all the military events. And there would only be like a little paragraph of them, but there were always the things that struck out at me. I can remember the reports on South American military operations, Colombia and Bolivia, I think. They were just little things, and it would say some abbreviation, and, the military flew in and did this sort of operation, and it might be just like 50 words, but it always sort of struck me as quite interesting. And so what I'm sort of getting to is, developing and really trying to get to grips with, things like the Ogaden War and an understanding of it, it's not just a sort of complete waste of time. I mean, it is a waste of time in a certain extent, but it can, especially if you're young, it can add to the quality of your background, as a lot of people call it. I mean, I wouldn't put on your CV I played Warblog a lot, but the thing is, you're gonna walk away learning something and improving yourself to a certain extent that will basically give you depending on how much background reading you do, and I've always suggested the background reading should be done, that has a value and that can actually sort of take you places. I mean, if you wanted to become, I'm just talking about war reporting, but you could end up sort of working in, say, and I always try to avoid the peace side of things, just because it's such a jaded, I don't know what those things called, where you have a little photo and a caption. Memes. Is it memes? I don't know. This whole thing about, it's all peace studies, it's just so, I don't know. Well, obviously we don't want war. We're not all warmongers, but it just becomes a bit sort of, it's war. I mean, we used to have in England, the Department of War, the Ministry of War, I think it was called. And they later changed it to the Ministry of Defence. And, when was the last time we defended ourselves? Why not call it the Ministry of Offence, or the Ministry of Blowing People Up, or the Ministry of Military Operations? Why don't you have to, it's like they used to have, basically the police used to interrogate people, but after the Second World War, word interrogation became a bit sensitive. So they started, we question people now. They don't interrogate people anymore. And it's similar things like that. This is one of the reasons I like to call it, I'm quite happy with the site being called Warblog and not Peace Blog, or, I mean, it just sort of doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, I just wanted to sort of bring that up, and I just wanted to sort of talk about these books that I just bought. And the only reason I'm doing this video, and I did actually mean it to just be actually less than 5 minutes, because I actually want to do a video, and now this is going to take hours to upload, and I probably won't be able to do that one now. And no one's ever going to read this. But I do want to do some sort of more background talk, just sort of general talks. But I think that, and if you've got this far in the video, then, I do think that there's sense in encouraging people to read about, the military history, for a wide range of reasons, just for self-enlightenment, as something that can be done. I mean, it could be in the background of anything, working with charities, working with, rebuilding projects, just generally, it's part and parcel. You can't study lots of things in life and not study, say, war. I mean, when I say lots of things in life, I mean you couldn't study international politics without studying war. You couldn't study, you couldn't study, I'm thinking of disease control. I used to study in a particular university department that had tropical health, a section for department on tropical health. Well, I think it was tropical health, and it was, it's all about, tropical health in the tropics, because it's quite a particularly specific sort of subject area, really, because of the climate. But you can't do things like that without sort of at least encompassing the impact of war, for example. What happens to, health infrastructure in times of war. And if you're dealing with droughts and famines and mass migration, and all these things, they all sort of blend into each other. So you don't have to be a warmonger to sort of, perhaps browse through Warblog and to pick up a book on Sarajevo, and to read it through and to get something out of it, etc., etc. So not a great point at the end of that. I mean, I didn't think of I didn't structure this as a sort of a lecture or anything, but reading books is good. So whenever I get another book, I might just sort of make another video on it and talk about my thoughts on the particular book. But maybe I'll read the book a little bit more. I've got tons of books that I've sort of partly read, some more than others. The problem is most of the books are not very good. Some of them are crap. I've got one book that's published by a particular publishing company that's actually sort of quite good. Let me just see if I can find it. 1 second. No, I can't find it. But basically, it's a book, and when you read it, it's just a printout of a very long Wikipedia article. And they didn't just self-publish it on like Amazon Kindle or something. They went to a publisher, and the publisher clearly didn't read it because you got rights. But I haven't got all of them. I bought a couple of these. I bought a small stack. It's about a third of what I've got here at this place. I've got a lot more elsewhere. But this book, Darfur, A Short History of a Long War, that's quite a good one, really, I think. This one's a load of crap. Waging Modern War, General Wellesley J. Clark. I mean, I would have probably... I've got an infestation of cats, and this have sharp claws. Peace Operations, War and Conflict in the Modern World. It's quite interesting because it gives you a list of all the peace operations, but it doesn't really give you any sort of major engagements. Mainly they haven't really done any. This is a terrible book. The US Invasion of Panama, The Truth Behind Operation Just Cause. An independent commission of the inquiry on the US invasion of Panama. And it's really a bit of sort of anti-American propaganda, really. I haven't really managed to get through it all because I think the Wikipedia article is probably more comprehensive, and I haven't really done that, but I've read through a bit of it. Mission for Hamarashkod, the Congo Crisis. And it's interesting, but I think it's about the guy that comes in, and he comes in pretty much after the main conflicts. I got part of the way through that and fell asleep, I think. This is an interesting one. Me Against My Brother, War in Somalia, Sudan and Rwanda. It's split up into sort of several sections. Again, it's very sort of first hand, but I think it sort of gives you the sort of background. That July morning in Mogadishu, the shoes of convening elders piled up at the offices of Abdi Hassan Awal Kwabit, the warlord's interior minister. In the second floor, the entrance hall before the carpeted conference room, the dust, the mud-covered shoes were of all types, like the elders themselves, who had gathered in one place to discuss the war between the UN and the Adid's Habir Gedir clan. They were looking for a way to make peace, to somehow end the ruinous blood feud raging between their adamantine warlord and the UN peacekeepers, etc., etc. So obviously it's got stuff in it. This one looks sort of interesting. I've got a few on this. The Third Arab-Israeli War, Edgar O. Balance. Edgar O. Balance, that's the guy that did the Greek one. He also did, by Edgar O. Balance, Kriyad, 1950-1953, the Algerian Insurrection, Malaya, the War in Yemen. That's an interesting book, isn't it? It's not even got a date to it. A valuable and most readable account of the last years of the Yemen's age-long imprisonment in the Middle Ages. 1 minute. Okay, yeah, so this is definitely the same guy. The Greek Civil War, the Third Arab-Israeli War, Edgar O. Balance. Let's really say who Edgar O. Balance is, but this Greek Civil War is an expensive book. It's my main thing at the moment, and I still haven't got anywhere through it. But this one looks really good. I've definitely taken this back with me. Doesn't say much about Edgar Balance. See, this has got a library thing in the back, date due, and it was never taken out. College of Marion Library. Okay, it's got one in the front as well. It's taken out on the 7th of May 1979, the 23rd of May 1979, and the 24th of May 1980. And then it was withdrawn. College of Marion Library, College Avenue, Kentfield, California 94904. And I would have bought that one probably from Abe Books. I'm definitely taking that back. Other books I've got, and I've got a couple of copies now, unfortunately. The Fall of Yugoslavia, the Third Balkan War. And I bought this twice, I think, and I'm possibly might have bought it 3 times because the cover is the only book that's ever really available at a reasonable rate on Abe Books. But they changed the cover, and I think I bought a different covered one and realised it's the same text, and I still haven't read it. I haven't read any of these books properly. You know, I say, oh, I'm going to have a relax. I'm just going to sit down and read one of these. I've read a bit of this one, Modern Ethnic Conflicts, Encyclopedia of, and most of the books I get, and I'm just disappointed with. You know, I get these and they're just rubbish. This is fairly interesting, but it doesn't give you enough to sort of work from. And I think what you really get with this, you know, it's got a lot of stuff in here: the Soviet Union, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Spain, Basque nationalism, Sri Lanka, Sudan, United Kingdom, the making of the British race relations. You know, this is under the modern ethnic conflict. It's interesting to see United Kingdom in there under making modern British race relations. United Kingdom, the Irish question and the partition of Ireland. United Kingdom, the conflict in Ulster. United Kingdom, Scotland and Scottish nationalism. The United Kingdom, the decline and revival of Welsh nationalism. It's interesting, really, because I'm English, and reading through a Wikipedia article on these things, and you know, includes all these sort of civil wars and nationalist struggles, and in there it includes Wales, the Welsh struggle for independence, and the Scottish struggle for independence, and you know, there just isn't any. You know, we used to have the angry party, the angry army, but you know, they haven't blown anything up since the 80s, I don't think. But you know, it's interesting. Sort of, once you put a name to it, you sort of wonder, you know, how much of what we're reading about other worlds is actually real and just sort of isn't written. I'm just going to go through these other books because I've got a little point. Like Africa's Armies from Honour to Infamy, a history from 1791 to present. I've read a little bit about that, but again, there's never anything enough that's meaty enough for my requirements. It's always sort of general and broad. This book I've read a fair amount of, but not really too much. It's Romeo Dallaire, Shake Hands with the Devil, the commander of the UN Assistance Mission to Rwanda, 1993 to 1994. He basically gets there after a lot of the conflict has been done, and it talks about his introduction to the country, and you know, it's interesting, but not a lot of battles. David Halberstam, The Coldest Winter, America and the Korean War. The United States Air Force in Korea, 1950 to 1953. More Wars in Faraway Places. This, you can tell this is a crappy book because it's really big, just like the United States Air Force in Korea, 1950 to 53. But it doesn't weigh that much. They've used the sort of paper that's got big print on it and it's got a thick wadge, but it's quite light. Feels like it's made of foam. And you know, things with this, Michael Burleigh, you get the feeling that he's just written this book for the sake of writing a book, because he's probably written a few other books and he puts out enough crap, he gets enough money in, and that's all there is to it. You know, there's nothing sort of inspired about it. You don't get the feeling, wow, you know, this is really going to give me some sort of substance. And it's that substance that I look for and I chase, and it's so hard to get. And you do pick up books. I think Edgar Balance has got to rank in what I would approach as a quality author. Most of these other ones I've gone through are not. I don't want to limit that to all of them because some of them are at least worth possessing, I think. Great Gamble, the Soviet War of Afghanistan, Jeffrey Pfeiffer. Again, a very light book. It looks like the sort of thing you might get with Reader's Digest. I've read a bit of it, but there's just nothing on this book. I mean, this is it looks like a sponge cake. It's Peter Thompson, The Wars of Afghanistan, Messianic Terrorism, Tribal Conflicts, and the Failures of the Great Powers. Diary of the Cuban Revolution by Carlos Franco. I've not read any of that yet. I don't think I even opened it. One second, I've got a couple more books to get. Yeah. So a few more. This one I'm going to be taking back, I think, just because it's got to be something I've been meaning to do. The 12 Days, the story of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. Put that with my balanced books. This is an interesting one. That's what I went back for. And talking of substance and solid content, I wouldn't say there's really something that I would truly read, but the book is called Strategic Bombardment, and it basically is all about bombing, strategic bombing as a sort of a discipline in its own right. So starting off with strategic bombardment before 1939, but mainly Second World War, things like Dresden, strategic bombing in the Pacific, US strategic bombing doctrine, strategic bombing in the Korean and Vietnam War, the Gulf War, strategic bombing and retrospective. And I really wanted to get to grips with it and read through it, and read a bit of it. It's by my bedside, because I want to sort of introduce strategic bombing, as part of Warblog, but that's why I included bombers. And I never really got that far, but I think, you pick all this stuff up, and that's all the books I've got here. And the ones I got here are the rejects, the things I don't take to the place where I keep all my good stuff. So that's maybe one of the reasons why there's not brilliant books. But I've got loads of journals and things. The Journal of Military History, formerly Military Affairs, the American Military Institute. This is a 1991 Defense Intelligence Journal, the publication of the Joint Military Intelligence College Foundation. The Journal of Military History. Leavenworth Papers, the Journal of Military History. Oh, look at that. Things that eat papers. The Journal of Military History, the Journal of Military History. These Leavenworth papers are pretty interesting. So, and the point I wanted to get to with all of that is that you can write books, and people buy books, and I think books are very passé, and people don't write as many books as they used to. But I still think that there is scope, and I think very specific and important scope for writing books, because of all the books, very few of them are actually of any good. What people pass as a good book, generally speaking, The Great Gamble is at the top. It's a load of rubbish. And, what I consider to be a good book is Warblog. So when I do my Journal of Modern Military History, we'll be defining what I consider to be good, and it will be just on the military operations, the maps, and that's it. And we'll see. But I've only got a minute and a half to get through, so complete disaster of a video, really, because I only wanted to go for 2 minutes. I got for an hour, and no one's ever going to watch this video. But yeah, so that's it. I mean, buy books, read them, learn, broaden yourself, make yourself more intelligent, and become a writer or a journalist, and improve your life by becoming a Warblog subscriber, reader, and all that. I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.